Let's start discussing about Bitcoin. I'm sure all of you are excited with this topic. So, last time in the previous lecture, we talked about cryptocurrencies. So, this is one of the killer apps of blockchain, and it was introduced by Satoshi Nakamoto. The first cryptocurrency was Bitcoin. So what we want to have is a distributed system. So you have multiple players and all of them should be able to pay each other money, right? And they shouldn't be able to pay each other the same money twice, which is what we called preventing the double spend attack. So what we want eventually is something like this. You have a distributed system with a blockchain, and the transactions that people make to each other will be recorded on the blockchain. So who are these players over here? Who are these participants? And in the cryptocurrency framework, it could be anyone. So anybody can join. And so really what we want is an arbitrary number of people participating. So an arbitrary number of participants. And we want also that people can join and leave at any time. So this sort of a blockchain is called permissionless. So nobody needs permission to join the blockchain network or to maintain the blockchain, right? So this is something completely new which Satoshi Nakamoto invented. So anybody, you and I, can join the Bitcoin network and try to maintain the blockchain, right? So the big question that we have over here is, how do we achieve consensus? So I said that in a blockchain, each block has a hash pointer to the previous block. Okay, we'll go through the fine details of the block and what's in the block a little bit later. But we have this blockchain, and blocks can get added at the end of the chain, and once it's added, it's there forever. That's the property that we want. But how do they decide what is going to be the next block? They all have to agree on what is the next block, which is what we call consensus. And this is a very tricky thing to achieve in a permissionless setting. If it was a permission setting, let's say that only 5 people were allowed, right? Let's say that majority of those 5 people, let's say, were honest, then we could have a voting system, right? You could say that if 3 people say that, or let's say a large number of them say that such a block is going to be the next one, then the entire system can agree to that, right? So even in a permission system, it's a little bit tricky how to achieve consensus. But people had worked out protocols for consensus in a permission type setting in the distributed systems community. But nobody thought such a thing is even possible in a permissionless system. Okay, but Bitcoin achieved that, and it's been working fairly well for more than 10 years, right? 11, 12 years almost. So how exactly does Bitcoin work? And essentially it has several ingredients. So first ingredient which we will talk a little bit about today is peer-to-peer networks. Second ingredient is cryptography. And in fact, it is cryptography which gives us trust in something like Bitcoin. Okay, so it's not like you have a bank or something like that which is trustworthy, which is used in usual financial transactions. Here we trust the mathematics behind cryptography. And we assume that there are certain cryptographic problems which are hard to solve. Right? And we'll see how Satoshi cleverly used cryptography. Then of course Satoshi uses some data structures which are sort of linked to cryptography in some way. Things like Merkle trees. Then of course Satoshi himself invented blockchains, which is a data structure. And then of course he put all of this together to come up with something called proof of work consensus. Proof of work, as we'll see, is extremely simple, and that's what is so stunning about it, that something so simple could actually solve what looked like an impossible problem. But let's start with peer-to-peer networks. Okay, so a little bit of history about peer-to-peer networks. How did they start? And maybe before we get into the history, why are we looking at peer-to-peer networks? Because Satoshi did not want any centralized control. So there should be no central control or point of failure. And peer-to-peer networks give us this property. So how did peer-to-peer networks start? Well, in the 90s, the internet was picking up. There was World Wide Web had come out, and companies like Amazon had started in the mid 90s. Of course, Amazon would only sell books in those days, right? But now, of course, it's the biggest. I mean, it has the richest man in the world owning it. But people were wondering how to use the internet in innovative ways, and one of the applications which came up is called file sharing, which probably many of us have used. So there were different people, let's say A, B, C, D and so on, and each of them had a certain set of files, let's say some movies or songs and so on, and they wanted to share it with the others. And the question was how to do this, right? So they were all benevolent, they just wanted to help each other out, and they also wanted the other person's files, So the first generation, I would say generation 1 maybe of these peer-to-peer networks, or sort of a precursor to peer-to-peer networks, was something called Napster. So it became extremely popular in the late 90s. So Napster was a company, they said that we will maintain a server and anybody could come. Let's say that there was a particular song that this person had, let's say song 1. He could go to this Napster server and he could say that I have this particular song. So it would list over there song 1 is with A, so that would be the IP address of A, let's say, right? And similarly B, C, and D could go to the server and they could tell the server what they had. Right? Maybe song 2 is with B and so on. Now, if somebody wanted, let's say D wanted song 1, right? Maybe what he could do is he could go to this particular server and he could search for the song. Right? He could do a search on this particular server for song 1 and it would tell him who had that particular song. And then of course he could go to, let's say, to A, and A could send him the song. Right? So this was sort of a primitive way of doing it. And the idea was that you just wanted to share what you had with the others. So as you can imagine, this was all copyrighted information. So it became a big problem. Napster was hauled off to court by the various companies, right? And they said that music companies and all were furious, Hollywood and whatnot, that we are not earning money, that people are getting this data for free. Right? So Napster was taken to court and they were forced to shut down. So of course the weak point here that it was still a centralized solution. So the government was able to take down this single point of failure, the Napster company or its servers. So of course people were wondering what to do beyond this, and so more advanced peer-to-peer networks came into being. And of course I would say that the second generation we could say was Gnutella. So Gnutella was different. So they said that let's say that this was the existing network. So 4 people, let's say, have got together to somehow create this network. And let's say that some new person E wanted to join. So now he would need some seed information. So seed info is sort of the initial info you need to join the network. Okay, so if you have no information, then how do you join the peer-to-peer network? Right? So there has to be some information either in a known server or it has to be embedded in your application code itself, which helps you get in touch with at least one person, let's say this person, who's part of the peer-to-peer network. So E joins, let's say, D. Let's say that they form a connection. So this would be a TCP connection that they set up with each other to send information to each other. And D could of course share some information about its neighbors. It could say that, okay, I am connected to B and I am connected to C and so on, right? It could give the IP address information. And E might say, okay, let me connect to one other person, let me connect to C. So they set up a TCP connection between them. So now, how do they, let's say, find out about different files? So let's say that A has song 1 and D has song 2. And let's say that B is looking for song 1. So what it could do is that it could first search in an expanding ring. It could first search, let's say, in one-hop neighbors. I just say search an expanding ring. So first what B would do is that it contacts its neighbors for the song. And if they don't have it, as in this case, it could go to 2-hop neighbors and so on. And if that doesn't work, it could go to 3 hops or whatever, right? Some higher number. So of course the brute force way would be to just broadcast the request for song 1 to the entire network. But that could be an overkill. Right? You'd be flooding the whole network potentially with thousands or millions of people with each and every search. And so that's an overkill, which is why we do this sort of a search in an expanding ring. Right? So first you search among your immediate neighbors, then you go to 2-hop neighbors and so on. And of course in this particular case, A will say that I have the song, and so B would of course say, okay, since you have the song, send it to me, and B would stop the search at this particular stage. Right? But in case 2-hop neighbors didn't have the song, it would continue. Right? So this was what Gnutella was. So the reason I am describing these Gnutella and so on is because your first assignment will have something like this, right? You'd have to set up a peer-to-peer network. On your laptop, you'd have to set up different virtual machines for each of these nodes and try to set up a peer-to-peer network among them. Of course, if you have multiple machines, that's even better. Then you can have a separate dedicated machine for each of these. So Gnutella was of course one way, so it avoided the problem of centralization. So that was a strong point. So it was harder to bring down Gnutella by legal means because there was no central point of failure. So of course peer-to-peer networks evolved much more beyond this. So something called distributed hash tables were made. So we won't go into the details of how DHTs work because it's not required in this course, but you can learn about this more in a networks course. But the idea in DHT is that when somebody has a particular file, let's say song 1 is with A, you don't want people to search for it in this expanding ring method. You want to be able to find it much faster. So in fact, if there are n nodes, we want to be able to find the song in log n steps. Yeah, and distributed hash table is a clever way to do that. So it's a very powerful idea. And it allows somebody else, let's say B, to very quickly find this song. So what B would do is it would use this distributed hash table to very quickly, let's say, zoom into where the song is, and it will be able to download. So techniques like, or peer-to-peer networks like BitTorrent would use something like distributed hash table, but of course it would do something more advanced. So BitTorrent would download not just from A, let's say that if there was another node which had the same song, right, it would download from them simultaneously just to speed up the download. Okay, so peer-to-peer networks were very advanced by the time Satoshi came on the scene. Satoshi came on the scene in 2008. But of course, Satoshi was probably working on his idea many years before that, right? So, because Satoshi came up with his white paper in, I believe, the end of sometime around October 2008, and in about January 2009, he came up with a full implementation of Bitcoin. Okay, so coming up with a full implementation is a non-trivial task, right? It's the first time anybody was doing something like that, and Satoshi's code and quality was extremely good, right? So if it is a single person, people say it's a genius, but maybe it was a team of people, let's say from the National Security Agency of the US, right? We don't know. But whoever it was must have been working on it for a long time to come up with such a high quality implementation. Obviously it had been thought through, and as we'll see, Bitcoin has a lot of details, right? It's not just an idea, it's like a full-fledged implementation. So probably Satoshi was working on the idea for several years, but he was very well aware of the technology out there. He was aware of peer-to-peer networks and cryptography and so on. Okay, so we look at the other topics, other things like cryptography and so on in the next lecture. But Satoshi definitely was on top of things. So the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network would also have look something like what we've seen before. So anybody can participate, and each person would have a set of peers. Let's say A is connected to these, B might be connected to some other peers, each of them is connected to a set of others. Okay. So if essentially they have to have some seed information to be able to connect to somebody in the network, and from then on they get some information from the first person they connect to, and they choose which of those people they are connected to. Okay, just like we saw before. So let's say that A is connected to these people. Let's say H comes in. He might first connect to A. A will say that I am connected to E, B, F and so on, and then H may decide to connect to E or maybe even to F and so on. So this is how they form the network. But Bitcoin doesn't need anything advanced like distributed hash tables, because it's not going to be used for file sharing. It's okay in a file sharing system. You don't want everybody to have all the files, right? Some people have the files, and that's why to be able to search for it becomes a challenge, right? How do you use distributed hash tables, or do you use an expanding ring, or what do you use? In Bitcoin, everybody has all the information. So all the transactions that people create are present with all the nodes, and this is done through broadcast. So if A has information, it has to send it to all its neighbors. It would send it to H, E, B, C, F and so on. And each of these would forward it to its own neighbors. D might forward it to G and so on, right? F might forward it to C. Okay. So every piece of information is broadcast to everybody else. Right? It goes through the entire network. So everybody has the same information. Okay, so it's a relatively straightforward peer-to-peer network. We just need a connected network, and then everybody forwards to everybody else. And this is sort of the basic network over which Bitcoin works. Okay, so we look at the other things like cryptography and data structures and proof of work in another lecture.